Chapter 5. Godzilla hoped to stop his opponent in his tracks by blasting his feet and legs, but that strategy received no response from the Permian predator apart from a snarl and an increase in speed. Seeing that melee combat was inevitable, he marched forward and prepared a trick he hadn't used in years. As he expected, the elder lunged for his jugular. He could free himself with a nuclear pulse, but instead, he struck one of his attacker's scales with a claw and discharged his nuclear power through his hand. Long ago, he had done the same to Space Godzilla to little effect, but it seemed to be more effective on his massive doppelganger. The elder reeled, releasing his hold and yelping in pain. Godzilla did not let up, biting the other set of gills and discharging more energy through his teeth. The elder screamed and raked its claws across his torso. A painful attack, but far from the worst that he had ever endured. He bit down harder and pumped more energy through his teeth. The elder slashed his chest again, and Godzilla was filled with contempt. A simple bite to an obvious weak point reduced it to such feeble failing. No wonder its kind had gone extinct. But the old king was nothing if not cunning. Perhaps if the young mutant had more experience in close combat, he would recognize what the elder was doing. Not merely scratching, but digging. The alpha predators dug his claws into the mutated Godzillasaurus's chest wounds and pulled with all of his strength, ripping off a large chunk of his armored hide, spilling literal tons of blood on the streets below. The mutation screeched in agony, but retaliated by pulling its head back and ripping out a chunk of the elder's scales, causing a river of blood to pour from the wound on his neck. With cries of pain, both Godzillas backed away from each other, glancing at their wounds. The Permian alpha predator had lost a chunk of flesh the size of a train car, and the mutant was missing a piece of his chest large enough to crush a small house. A piece that the elder discarded without a second thought, as the spikes at the end of his tail began lighting up. The mutant Godzilla was still bellowing in rage when he noticed his naturally evolved rival's spines beginning to glow. The elder took a deep breath and let loose a stream of nuclear fire directly at the wound on his foe's torso. Once more, Godzilla shrieked in pain. He knew what the elder was trying to do: cauterize his wounds to keep them from healing. Destroyer's Zorn had similar properties. It wouldn't work, not in the long term, but in the short term, it was excruciating and meant that more of his energy would be dedicated to clearing away the damaged flesh. He immediately charged his own atomic breath and returned fire. The elder shifted slightly to keep his own injury out of the line of fire, so he instead focused on trying to burn away his chest armor. After a moment, he relented to check the damage, but the glow did not fade. Realizing what this meant, he immediately fired again, intercepting his rival's atomic breath. Even to the unlucky few still trapped in the city, it was strangely beautiful sight. What looked to most people like a laser fighting fire cast the city and its ruins in a haunting blue light. but the elder's flames were not as strong as the beam from his younger rival. He had been born to modern nuclear waste and weaponry, while the Permian kaiju had evolved for a more natural source of radiation. The beam war could only end one way, and true enough, the ball of energy where each projectile met was slowly pushed towards the elder before it exploded. A lesser kaiju might have been killed by such an explosion. Even most greater kaiju would have at least been toppled by the force of the blast, but such was the old king's strength and willpower that did not nearly that he did not merely remain standing, but came charging out of the cloud it produced at full speed. Godzilla was caught off guard by his foe's tenacity and was unprepared for the impact. He fell to the ground, collapsing into a skyscraper, which then fell on him, burying him. The old Godzilla was not fooled. He knew that his foe could survive such burial and immediately began to stomp on the rubble, hoping to crush the mutant beneath his weight, as he would eventually crush the female Muto. Such hopes were dashed when an atomic ray emerged from the rubble, causing him enough pain to make him step back, allowing the younger Godzilla to break free of the debris pile. The elder wailed, intending to break his ribs again and leave him open for a killing blow. But then something happened that truly caught him by surprise. The mutation caught his tail and then lifted him skyward and slammed him back to the ground. He scratched at the pavement in an attempt to stay on the ground, but the works of the man were not meant to withstand such force, and he was lifted again. He wasn't sure how many times he was pounded against the ground. He was growing dizzy. But finally, the young mutant Godzilla turned and threw him to the side, and threw one skyscraper into another, both of which fell on him. Godzilla unleashed his pent-up fury by blasting the makeshift grave with his atomic breath until he heard a scream of pain and saw a large explosion. He roared his victory into the sky, until he was struck in the back of the head by an atomic ray. He snarled and turned to face his next challenger. The young mutant, the one that had been imprisoned in Antarctica for decades, had survived the elder's attack. Kaiser Ghidorah had also forced him to swallow an atomic ray, his own, when he had lost the beam struggle, and it had dazed him, but not killed him. The Alpha Predator's attack had been no different. He had collapsed and regenerated the damage, then reawakened. Now, he was ready to kill his other rival. Both Godzillas roared and fired their atomic rays at one another. The beams seemed to be equal, and seconds later exploded in a blinding flash. The possessed Godzilla was being pushed to his limits by two opponents. The first, the Protector of Japan, had been his rivals since this day had begun, and while he was almost certain he had learned all the old king's tricks, after having experienced his ability to fly, he was not going to assume any such thing. The other was a recent development. The scarred Godzilla had, for some reasons unknown to the souls driving the demon, taken one look at him and then attacked him in rage. The champion, having found an ally, seemed to have come upon a second wind and began punching the demon with renewed determination, and was now shuffling his feet like a human boxer, likely in an attempt to avoid any future kicks. The scarred Godzilla was not content to remain on the sidelines. Such was the rage he felt towards the demon that he occasionally shoved the hero out of the way so that he could have a turn attacking. Every scratch and bite had more than a mere animalistic adrenaline behind it. The demon sensed that the beast wanted to destroy him. Specifically, he whirled around, slamming his tail into his scarred opponent's face, knocking him to the ground. But before he could take advantage of the moment, he was tackled to the ground by the old king. With one hand, the hero pressed on his neck, keeping the demon from shifting his weight, and with the other, he made a fist and repeatedly brought it down on the possessed kaiju's face. Hammer blow after hammer blow impacted one side of the demon's head, driving the other side into the concrete beneath him. But through all of this, the demon was still thinking and planning. He timed the hero's strikes until he caught the offending fist in his jaws and bit down hard, impaling the hand on long teeth. The hero pried his jaws apart as the villain knew he would, but then predictably backed away. The demon paid no mind to the tooth he lost when the hero ripped his hand out. He should have. As the undead Godzilla rose to his feet, the old champion pulled the offending tooth out of his hand, rushed forward, and drove it into one of the demon's eyes. Screaming in agony, the demon backed away from the savage hero and charged his atomic breath. The hero beat him to the punch and blasted his torso, but he held the charge until his foe finished and then let loose with his full power. From a distance, some saw the mushroom cloud that appeared when he fired it, but up close, the demon had to wait until the smoke cleared to see his handiwork. There was a trail of blood leading into Tokyo Bay, which was now red with the blood of the old protector. The demon roared in victory and turned to face his next victim. He received an atomic ray directly to his bad eye for his trouble. The scarred Godzilla did not exactly mourn for the hero. They had never met before today, and his protective nature towards human settlements would have disgusted him if he knew of it. But he wanted to slay the abomination, and that was something Godzilla could respect. He would simply make sure to kill it himself. A bright flash was what woke Godzilla 2000 up. He was dimly aware that he must have been struck hard, because his last memory made no sense. There was no such thing as a flying Godzilla, so there was no way that one had fallen on his head. He groggily got to his feet. He could smell radiation in the air. No doubt that there had been a great many beam wars while he was unconscious. He could see two of the titans battling in the distance, and looked around for challengers closer to his size. He saw the scarred one fighting the white-eyed one not far from the bay, which was now crimson with blood. He was about to make his way towards them when he felt a rumbling coming from behind him. He turned to look and saw something truly unexpected. Bursting from the ground with a powerful roar was his identical rival. His lack of responding roar belied his shock. The slayer of Megaguirus had not been killed by the explosion above his head, merely hurt and forced on the ground, just as the destruction of the Dimension's Tide's black hole had done. He had simply needed time to regenerate, and remaining on the ground had been the best option. He erupted from his former grave and charged. Godzilla 2000 turned and lashed out with his tail. He did not expect his speedier double to duck, causing his tail to slice itself open as it whipped across his sword-like spikes. The first of the Millennium Gojirahkiins wailed and looked back at his tails. Though not quite amputated, the combination of the tail's weight, momentum, and the sharpness of the spike had cut into it deeply, and it hung from the thin strips of flesh in several places. His rival challenged him again, and fury eclipsed pain in Godzilla 2000's mind. He rushed forward, heedless of any danger. Godzilla 2000 struck with all the force he could muster, throwing his entire body into each of his blows, while his rival seemed to concentrate on speedy strikes. He lunged forward, biting his rival's shoulder and tearing off some of the armored scales. His foes retaliated by swiping a claw across the front of his neck, drawing blood. He groaned. He was not stupid. His foe was just as strong as him, and much faster. He had only one real option left. Godzilla 2000 caught both of his foe's claws and forced him into a grapple, but did not push back when his rival began forcing him backwards. Instead, he began to charge his final attack, the same one that had killed Origa. His spines began to glow, and the glow started spreading to the rest of his body. His identical foe seemed baffled by this turn of events, but he began to charge his atomic ray. It would all come down to this. One last beam struggle. His foe's atomic breath may have destroyed a black hole, but Godzilla 2000 could put every drop of his inner radiation into his atomic ray. This attack would grant him victory or kill him. Both Godzillas fired, and moments later were engulfed by a fiery explosion, muffling a pair of pained roars.